Okay. So just to give kind of an overview of where we're at in the project. So last fall, we had a series of workshops with people from the different 4 states. These were mostly to start to connect people in the region that are working on pollinator restoration, to try to understand kind of different priority species that you all care about, that you might need more information about, and kind of understand like where you get information right now on when things are blooming or when seeds are ripening, and kind of what species to plant for your area, and how we might make improvements to that. We started doing data collection last year, and we are still really in the data collection phase right now. We'll share kind of where we're at in terms of the amount of data we have so far, but this is definitely kind of a push for the last few months of phase 1 of this project. This phase 1 goes until September of this year, and as April mentioned, we have applied for an additional 3 years of funding, so we're hoping that we'll be able to keep the project going when it comes to that time. But we definitely want to push for getting some more data collection for the next few months. And then this summer, we'll be synthesizing the information that we have so far, probably pulling in some information from outside the region too, if we don't have kind of sufficient numbers for some of the species, and then creating a series of kind of info sheets for the different states, or even like locations within the states where we have data. And then we'll put together a story map that describes what we've done so far. And we do definitely want to keep all of you involved in that process. So we'll have, a couple more quarterly calls before September with some chances to kind of weigh in on the products that we're developing to make sure that they're useful. So just to kind of get back into why we're collecting this information, I mentioned at the start that we're really trying to assist with kind of more climate-informed pollinator restoration. So during our workshops in 2021, we did a survey of kind of what are the aspects of phenology that would be most useful for you to know. And so it came out that really it's everything, but the start, when flowering starts or when ripe seeds start is important. Peak is also important, knowing when the most nectar is available or when the most seeds are ripe. And then also the duration of that, how long is that period? So then you can start to put together kind of when nectar is available at different times of the year, if there's like overlap between species, and how much that of nectar is available at different times of the year. And then also when are seeds ripe for seed collection. So we are hoping that we can get enough data where we can start to identify the climate drivers of what is influencing these things to happen. So is it linked to temperature, precipitation? Can we identify those variables that kind of predict when these things are happening? And then we can use climate projections to look and see, if a particular plant is like really tied to temperature, and we know that temperatures are going to be warming in the future. Does that mean that that plant is going to be shifting its flowering timing earlier? Or maybe it's the opposite and it's delaying certain species as well. And then what is that amount of flexibility that each different species has? Is it able to have some flexibility in when it's able to flower, or is it pretty stable and kind of always flowering at the same time, and maybe less able to kind of keep up with early springs and things like that? So we also identified a set of kind of a subset of species that are of interest for the region. I realized that not all of these species are found in all of our locations. It's hard to come up with a short list, but we did decide on trying to have a short list just so that we can make sure that we have enough data for at least a few species to kind of test out these methods of trying to produce these phenology calendars that have that enhanced information about variability and peak, and the link between the phenology of these species and the climate drivers. So we're trying to push data collection on these species in particular, and it's kind of a variety of different kinds of nectar plants that are found across the region. And we also have a longer list which we can share a link to that as well. But these are kind of the focal 8 for this first phase of our project here. So just to get into what we have so far, so not a lot of updates since our last call last fall. We did add a few more observations for fruits of common buttonbush, but this is where we're at in terms of the amount of data that we have for the species that are in that top 8, and we only have 5 so far. And what these numbers represent are basically we're looking at site years. So this is the onset, which is the, when did open flowers start or when did ripe fruit start in a particular year for a particular site. And so we kind of determined based on previous research that we probably need about 30 site years to be able to really do that climate driver analysis. So that's our target for these species. We're getting, we're over halfway there for a couple of them for buttonbush and sunflower, but we still have a ways to go on the other species, at least for the region. But if we bring in data from outside the region for these same species, we do have quite a bit more. And these are updates from the change from last time. So we have, 56 where we had 55 last year. So we're adding a bit more. We still have a ways to go in the region, but with the data from outside the region, we might be able to supplement that a bit to do some of the analyses. But we really do want to push for that more data collection for our last about half a year before the project wraps up in phase 1. So I would open it up if anyone has ideas. I know we have people hard at work. We heard in our introductions, we have Gina working in Louisiana, working to get some more sites set up. And it sounds like the folks in New Mexico are also getting some more data collection going. And these also, the numbers I showed just now are Nature's Notebook data. So we are planning on pulling in data from iNaturalist as well. That it's not as ideal in terms of being able to look at the peak in flowering and seed ripening, but we can supplement the Nature's Notebook data with iNaturalist records as well. And I know that in some states like Texas, a lot of people are using iNaturalist there. So that will probably be a source of data as well. But I would just open it up if anyone has thoughts on kind of ideas for increasing data collection. If you have maybe a location near you where there's an organization with a group of volunteers or someone who might be interested. If you want to share any contacts, we're happy to reach out. We can have our state coordinators reach out to those folks. And we're also happy to do trainings and things like that on how to use Nature's Notebook. But yeah, just kind of open it up right now to see if anyone has thoughts on that.
So I do have some thoughts really quickly.
Yeah.
I've been in the last few weeks reaching out to a lot of state parks, city parks, stuff like that in the several 100-mile radius around New Orleans. Mm-hmm. And one thing I've been consistently finding is that a lot of the state parks are very interested in the project, but they don't have the people to be able to ensure that they're going to have consistent data collection. So one that I've heard from a couple of parks is that they have volunteers, but that they're reluctant to overburden them because they're carrying so much weight already due to a lack of personnel at the park, that they're basically saying, we're interested if you want to come out and set up the site and do all the data collection yourself. Like, we would love that, but we don't have the people. So I was thinking maybe Gail had a great idea to target Nichols State, because the student population there is definitely a good, reliable, group that we could get involved with data monitoring. I was thinking I would also probably reach out to University of Louisiana Lafayette, because there are a lot of prairies in the Eunice Lafayette area that I think would be interesting to monitor. And they have a pretty robust biology department with some faculty that I know that I think would be interested in getting involved. So I guess maybe directing our efforts towards places where there are groups of people who could definitely commit to being regular participants for data collection, so we can ensure that these sites have long-term viability.
Yeah, those are great thoughts. Yeah, student groups are good, and you have that longevity even when the students, go to the next level of their classes. You have the teachers there for the sustainability of the project, and they can work with new students each year. We've also had a lot of luck with master naturalist groups, those kind of groups, even master gardeners, where they have a service requirement where they need to have hours in doing something like that, and often they want to set up a project. So I'm not really sure about the master naturalist associations in Louisiana, but that could be another source of the kind of volunteers that would, travel to go to a site like that where it's open to them doing data collection. They just need the data collectors.
Right.
Hi, this is Gail. We learned, or I learned that some campuses are called pollinator campus. And I think that Nicholls State's trying to do that at their university. So I don't know if that's an opportunity for other universities in our region, if they do have pollinator campus or even community campus, that, city pollinator.
Yeah, was it something to do with bees, like bee campus or something like
Bee
that?
campus, that's what it was, right?
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
Bee Campus USA and I think Bee City USA.
That's what it is.
I think those are administered through Xerxes or some sort of affiliation with Xerxes Society.
So I guess it'd be kind of interesting if we could find out which campuses are considered bee campuses within the project.
Yeah, I did glance at that website. I don't know if they have a list of all the universities participating, but I'm sure we could find that out. Yeah, thanks. Looks like there's some things in the chat I haven't been watching. All right. And someone asked about postcards. So we're out of postcards for now. We can get some more printed. I actually need to update the this text to join thing is going away on our platform. So I can update the postcards and then I can send out another form to see if people want postcards and how many. And we can use that to help spread the word too. Yeah. All right, should we switch over to our next slide is the survey results. So can you see that okay, or should I put it in presentation mode?
Yeah, maybe presentation mode.
Okay. What is that? Everything's hiding it.
Julie also has a good comment in the chat about master naturalist.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not an interest problem, but like, yeah, sustaining the volunteers. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, so this is the survey that we put together in the fall. If you didn't fill it out, I didn't close it, so you could still submit your answers. This is what we're using to shape the info sheets and story map products that Erin was mentioning coming out of this first phase of the project. So we offered you two options. One that was so the graph on the upper left is showing the days that the proportion of yes records to the total number of records. So like if it's all dark reds, like everybody said yes to open flowers for common sunflower in that week. And if it's like gray, like some reports were yes and some reports were no. And if it's light red and then if it's gray, it was like all the reports were no flowers for common sunflower. So it kind of gives you this more nuanced picture of when peak blooming or most sunflowers were blooming. And the option on the left is like more detailed for a single species than using the intensity. So if you think of the Nature's Notebook protocol where you're able to also say like what % of flowers are open, this gives you like a total estimate of the number of open flowers. And so you can see for the common buttonbush in Louisiana over the lumping the 3 years together where the peaks are. And so we so far in the survey are seeing like 70% in favor of the community calendar, 30 in favor of the individual calendar. I don't think this is necessarily going to be, when we can talk about it on this call too, but I don't think this will necessarily be a hard choice. I think we can make some visualizations with the community and some visualizations with the more detailed intensity data. But I think because we're working with people who are doing restoration with like a whole series of species, it's not maybe so surprising that people are into the community calendar idea. And then, yeah, the next slide. So here, digging in on the individual calendar, just sort of seeing which of the three options for visualization people like. So the first one is the top left, where it's the heat map on the bottom with the curve on top. The second one below it is two curves, and the third one is 2 heat maps. And there was also a pretty clear preference towards the mixed, which I also like that one better, the heat map on the bottom with the curve across the top. It seems more intuitive, like we're talking proportion of records for the bottom and then the number of flowers for the top. So that seems pretty clear how to do that one. And then what's the next one? Oh, so variation. This is something that we often talk about in our office at NPN, like, and wonder how much people are interested in knowing the variation that goes behind a data summary like this. So if you look at the top left is the same viz we've been looking at the whole time, the open flowers in buttonbush, common buttonbush in Louisiana from 2018 to 2021. Probably a lot of data that Gail's contributed to. And so you get this picture, right? And where it looks like a lot of blooming is happening in June, and then it starts to trail off, but there's still some days with a lot of blooming happening in August. But there's a lot of variation behind this. So the let's see, we'll go to the top right, interannual variation. So that's each one of these years, 21, 2020, 2019, from top to bottom, it goes 2018 to 2021. And so you can see how each of these years looked a little bit different, either in terms of when people went out to observe. If there's like a blank, that means there's no records for that week. But we tend, we see, fairly similar pattern across the 4 years, but some differences. And then spatial variation. So here I blocked it out by different latitudes. So you can see, I can't even quite remember what it is, but I think it's maybe further south ones on the bottom to further north ones on top. So you can see a little bit of spatial variation across the region for bloom times. And then back over to the bottom left, this is 4 different individual observers who might be reporting different things on different days. So the question we were asking here is like, are people, which, if any of these forms of variation are relevant to you as you're planning for pollinator restoration or trying to, better understand bloom times. And so if you go to the next slide, the interannual variation was the most popular. 20 people thought it was very important. 10 people thought it was somewhat important, and no one thought it was not important. So that's good to know. I think interannual variation is probably something that we're all thinking about and talking about a lot, and it has a big impact. I personally see years that are really different one after the other. And I do want to track that, and I do want to understand what climate factors affect that variation. The spatial variation was still got a number of people, a majority still saying that it was either very important or somewhat important. And then observer variation was it was either not important to 10, was maybe more of I guess it's still a majority of people saying it's somewhat important or very important. But of the 3, it was not seen as relevant. So maybe, I don't know how we're doing on time. Before we go to that next one, you just throw open conversation to, because the survey is a survey, right? It's, I think, helpful to have, but I also really appreciate when you actually have a conversation with someone, like hearing what they're thinking or why they might prefer one thing or another. So I'd love to hear any comments that you have about the direction that we're thinking about going with these, all of these visualizations.
I have a quick question, and being new to this is my naivete shining through here, but because I remember taking the survey, so it's cool to see where all this kind of is leading to. But in the end, is this something that you're looking all towards doing as a report, or more as creating sort of guides? And if it's for guides, is there also going to be inclusion of actual plant photographs?
Yeah, do you want to answer that too, Erin? I mean, I think, yeah, the info sheets that we envision, I would call them guides. I think like they'll be intended to help support decision-making for pollinator restoration in a changing climate. So yeah, I think there would be for sure pictures of the species and visualizations along the lines of whichever seem the most useful in those info sheets. I don't know, does that answer? Do you want to add anything, Erin?
Yeah, I would say that for the first phase, the deliverables will be pretty static in the sense that, yeah, it'll be a document that kind of presents, these are the results we have so far. This is the kind of information we hope to be able to deliver for more species and more locations. And then the ultimate goal is really to have more of a tool that people could use where they could see more like in real time, you know, where it would be incorporating data and you'd be able to, you know, look at your location and see and compare all the information in a phenology calendar like this that would have the, maybe we'll go back to this one here, something like the one here on the right, you know, but maybe at a community level. So you would have all that information for all the species, and then you'd also have the ability to kind of see ahead, you know, what would this look like under future climate conditions. So that would be kind of like what we're going for in the long term. But I think another thing we talked about during the workshops was, you know, we don't want to make just another tool that people have to use. And would it be better if we helped other organizations like incorporate this information into the bloom guides that they already have? So, you know, there are a number like Pollinator Partnership and Xerces have planting guides that have those kind of general ideas about when things are blooming, and can we give them this information that they can add in, and then they already probably have the, you know, the photos of the plants and things like that, and all the other information you might want about planting, you know, that is not really specifically phenology related, and then we can be adding in the phenology piece to those to create like a better package of information.
Thank you. I mean, I like this visually, to be honest, but I know my mind is going, especially as an extension person, like, okay, for end user in terms of citizen science or community groups or students, or what have you, that, yeah, and obviously you can't do everything at once. So I was just curious as to, but it sounds like there's room for this to be even further developed or integrated, and that's great.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, you know, in our future quarterly calls, the next couple before September, that'll be where we're going to get feedback from you all on what those info sheets and the story map looks like. So yeah, that kind of input's really helpful, and we can make sure to have visuals of the plants themselves too.
Yeah, and Melanie, if you have like off the bat, you're like, this is how I would further synthesize it for a community, like that'd be awesome to either, you know, schedule a separate call to tell us, or if it's like email it or whatever. This is like a great time for that kind of info to be thinking about that. It's a great question.
Okay, thank you.
It's not a bad tie into that last slide we have, Erin, you know,
Yeah.
thinking about what's existing and how we're hoping to improve it. So, you know, we're thinking about, you probably are aware, like, or there's many calendars along these lines of what's shown at the top of this slide. So you can see it's a little hard to see, but in the far left column, it says bloom period, and it's early, mid, late, and late. And so it's really not even clear like what months it is, but many of the calendars do have like month by month when things typically bloom. But as we were just like talking through those calendars, what we're hoping to do is provide more like fuller, realer information on when something can be expected to be in bloom. Like such as the bottom example or the community calendar that we were just looking at. And so that, right, and as Erin was saying, that might come probably we're hoping it will come in both in the form of like standalone info sheets that have that information, as well as integrating into existing resources like this because that's where, you know, that's the full picture. We always know that phenology is just like an important slice, we always think, but like one slice of the whole picture of factors that people are going to be thinking about when they're choosing plants for restoration.
So, yeah, we welcome any other thoughts on this. And that, I think Alyssa put the survey link in the chat if you want to fill that out. If you haven't yet, it's still open. Yeah, but any other thoughts on not just this, but anything else we've talked about? I know there are some things, other things in the chat that I missed, but some discussion about the spring index maps, I think.
Maybe going back to that conversation in the chat about how everyone responds with enthusiasm to the idea of monitoring Nature's Notebook, but needs that volunteer motivation and support. And so I guess that just makes me think, like, what are the kinds of things that we at NPN already provide or could provide that would help? You know, is it, I know it's often like local connection, like having meaning, right? Like you're going out with your friends, or there's a potluck, or there's the tea. What is it that they do in Minnesota? They have like they get all their phenology monitoring volunteers together for like tea time on Zoom, I think, right? Erin
Yeah,
can speak better to this.
One thought that I had, and a piece of feedback I've gotten from a couple of the sites that I've talked to, is that they have interns that theoretically could be asked to do this as part of their work. I think that having a financial incentive, you know, for people who are paid interns to be actually doing the monitoring is pretty big, because like y'all mentioned again, the big hurdle here is that it's a pretty heavy volunteer undertaking to be taking this data as frequently as we're going to need it to have anything, you know, useful and meaningful. So some of the sites I'm reaching out to are specifically asking me if there's any sort of funding for interns. And I know at this time that's not necessarily something available, but it might be something worth considering in the future. Because the interest is there. They just really do need a little bit more of a motivational push is what I'm getting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think maybe we can do more to kind of help people pinpoint like a smaller window of time that we're really hoping that they'll do data collection. You know, I think it can seem really overwhelming if it's that you know, we're asking for like at least once a week for the whole year. That's like, oh, that's a lot to ask. But it's really, you know, these transition periods where we're trying to capture the onset of flowering and the peak. Maybe if we can like focus in on that a little bit, you know, to try to make that a smaller time commitment.
I think that's a great idea too. A lot of the parks that I talk to, and the park that I work at, the Barataria Preserve, have a lot of spring programming that is sort of overlapping with the times that we would be most interested in, both spring and fall. Heavy programming with heavy community involvement, where maybe we could incorporate some of that into a kind of temporary programming thing with people monitoring for the rest of the year if they're interested, but being able to kind of have a big push in those sensitive time periods.
Yeah, I think for those the 8 priority species, we did have a general like couple months that we know that they're blooming, and I think that's like for the whole region. Maybe we could break that out by states to kind of have a better idea about what is the general blooming time for these species, so we can help people target and really try to pinpoint, you know, what is like the week that things start blooming, or the week that it does peak. That might be more helpful to be able to kind of provide some guidance there, and maybe put that on the time to restore page.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of making me wonder if because there's also the whole seed timing piece of this, and like helping people time when to go out to collect seeds. But maybe just in terms of thinking about the scope and how like biting off the right amount for the team, and especially for this first 2-year phase, maybe we just do seed in a couple of like targeted locations or whatever, and really the broader thing is about flowering. Seeding is also a place where it's like harder in the iNaturalist data, like, flowering, it's easier to supplement these calendars, and, we are going to be able to get some extra information, definitely fill in some gaps spatially, and enrich those visualizations with iNaturalist data, but that won't work as well for seeding.
Yeah, and I think Jane's group with TAP, they were really interested in the seeding, so maybe we could see if they will focus in on that part of it, and then everyone else can kind of be focused on the flowering part for this year.
Yeah, for now at least.
Any other thoughts or questions or anything before we close?
I'm just wondering if there's some data on the time it takes for our fake plants to, after they flower, how long it takes for them to go to seed. Do we have any? I mean, not from Nature's Notebook, but if there are any other sources that would give us some ideas. Well, the wild bergamot blooms in June, and then it goes to seed by October. Anything like that would be helpful to me. Just get an idea. When do I expect these things to go to seed?
Yeah, I would ask Jane about that, probably, at least for Oklahoma, because I feel like they're the most in tune with that, because they do a lot of data or seed collection. But I haven't, when I've looked for resources, haven't run into that kind of information, at least not associated with these the planting guides that exist. I think those are mostly for knowing, when are these species in bloom. But yeah, I don't know if anyone else knows of any resources like that. I haven't found any yet, especially for this region, but that's definitely a big piece of it. And that is something where, even if we don't have a lot of observations where we have the flowering and the seed data from the same individual plants, we do have more data from outside the region. So maybe that's something we could look at there, just to get a sense, of that interval between when flowering starts and then when the seeds are ripe. And we could see if we could bring in some of that outside the region data. All right, well, thanks everyone for joining. We will send out a follow-up email, and we'll probably have another quarterly call in another 3 months or so. So we'll be in touch about that, but thanks for all the input and great questions, and we're excited to keep working on this project with you all.
It's good to see everybody.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank
nice
you
to
all.
I haven't met before. Thanks for the conversation.
Take care, everyone.